After Shingen's death, the anti-Nobunaga pressure weakened. The alliances that had pressed Nobunaga and Ieyasu began breaking apart. But one enemy did not stop. Takeda Katsuyori, Shingen's son, kept attacking Ieyasu. In June 1574, Katsuyori captured Takatenjin Castle inside Ieyasu's territory. That gave him an important forward base. Then, he prepared the next strike, Nagashino Castle. If Takeda Katsuyori captured Nagashino Castle, he could pressure Tokugawa Ieyasu from the north and the east. It was the same kind of squeeze his father, Takeda Shingen, had used when he marched toward Kyoto. And now Katsuyori was trying to carry that strategy forward. In 1575, Katsuyori marched with about 15,000 and besieged Nagashino Castle. Inside were only about 500 defenders. But Tokugawa Ieyasu saw this attack coming. He ordered the castle lord, Okudaira Nobumasa, to harden the defenses, including digging double moats. Nagashino Castle was also wrapped by rivers. It looked almost impregnable. In fact, the attackers could strike from only one direction, the north. But inside the walls was a deadly weakness. The garrison was too small, and the rice stores were not enough to endure a long siege. So without help, the fall of the castle was only a matter of time. Someone would have to slip through the siege and call for reinforcements. And that looked like suicide. A soldier named Torii Suneemon volunteered. He barely slipped through the Takeda siege lines and reached Ieyasu to beg for reinforcements. Then he turned back, risking everything to bring the news to the people inside the castle. But on the way, Takeda troops caught Suneemon. They bound him to a wooden post and forced him to shout toward Nagashino Castle. They demanded he lie. Reinforcements are not coming. Surrender now. Suneemon refused. Instead, he yelled the truth. Reinforcements are already near. Hold on just a little longer. For that defiance, Torii Suneemon was executed on the spot. He was put to death by impalement as a brutal warning, but it backfired. His death hardened the defenders' resolve, and they held Nagashino Castle until help finally arrived. Nobunaga and Ieyasu brought an allied force of about 38,000 men. They could commit that many troops because the anti-Nobunaga coalition was breaking apart. So at last, they could concentrate their full strength on the Takeda. When the Oda Tokugawa army arrived in the rear area, Katsuyori's Kashindan urged retreat. The numbers were brutal, and the risk was obvious. But Katsuyori chose a decisive battle. Nobunaga and Ieyasu built a defensive line around Shitaragahara, a muddy field and rice paddy area. They raised wooden palisades about 6 feet high, stretching for over a mile. Behind those barriers, they placed matchlock gunners. Matchlock guns took time to reload, so against fast-charging Takeda cavalry, a simple volley could be too slow. Nobunaga brought in about 3,000 matchlock gunners for this battle. He split them into 3 groups of 1,000. He had them fire in rotation, so one line shot while the next line reloaded. This tactic is often described as the famous 3-stage firing method. On the northern Maruyama Hill, Nobunaga placed Sakuma Nobumori, right in the center of the battlefield. Once the fighting began, it was the kind of position where you had to assume you would die. Before the battle, Sakuma sent Katsuyori a secret letter. It looked like betrayal. It said, "If I am going to die anyway, I will join the Takeda side." But it was bait, a trap designed by the Oda Tokugawa alliance to pull Katsuyori in faster and deeper into the killing ground. Katsuyori had seasoned commanders at his side, men who had seen real war. They warned him not to swallow an unverified temptation like this. But Katsuyori and his inner circle felt crushing pressure. If they avoided this battle, they feared people would doubt he was Shingen's rightful heir. And in the end, the Takeda army moved forward. Step by step, they advanced toward Shitaragahara, where the Oda Tokugawa forces had dug in. As Katsuyori advanced, Nobunaga and Ieyasu ordered a quiet, lethal strike. They formed a detachment and sent it out in secret. Its target was Tobigasuyama, the Takeda siege outpost that supported the Nagashino siege. The detachment stormed the fort and took it, and with that outpost gone, the Takeda siege lines around Nagashino began to collapse. In a heartbeat, Katsuyori went from attacker to defender. And that shift did something worse than change the battlefield. It cornered his mind. Retreat was no longer an option. In open field against Nobunaga and Ieyasu, he believed he had only one choice: win. The battle began, and the Takeda cavalry charged. They had a reputation as the most feared horsemen of the Sengoku age. But the ground betrayed them. Mud slowed the horses and killed the momentum of the charge. Then the gunfire hit. Matchlock gunners fired in rotation, wave after wave, without giving the Takeda time to breathe. Most riders fell before they even reached the line. Even the lucky ones who dodged the bullets slammed into the palisades and the anti-cavalry barriers. Horses and men tangled, stuck, panicking. Then spear units moved in and finished the job. The Takeda cavalry collapsed without landing a real blow, and once that cavalry broke, Katsuyori's army had no answer. The rest of the force unraveled, and the battle turned into a rout. Takeda losses were catastrophic. As many as about 13,000 men were killed, a blow close to annihilation. And the worst part was who died. While the Oda Tokugawa side lost mostly rank-and-file soldiers, the Takeda lost a shocking number of key commanders. Among the Takeda 4 heavenly kings, 3 were killed in this battle. Katsuyori barely escaped with a small bodyguard. He fled north and retreated back towards Shinano. For Ieyasu, this was payback at last. At Mikitagahara, he had nearly died fleeing Shingen. Now at Nagashino, fighting alongside Nobunaga, he finally repaid that defeat by breaking Shingen's sun. History often shows barbarians having more raw power, but technology changes everything. The Battle of Nagashino proved that the era of raw warrior spirit was being replaced by economic and military technology. Nobunaga and Ieyasu did not leave the Takeda a chance to recover. Even as the Takeda clan was already collapsing, they kept hunting Katsuyori all the way back into his own lands. And in the final campaign to finish the Takeda for good, the Hojo joined the hunt as well. Katsuyori fled into the mountains to Mount Tenmoku. Cornered, he took his own life by Seppuku, together with his family. It is said he left words like this: "I can no longer walk the world with my face held high." And on that day, the Takeda clan was erased from the Sengoku period stage. It was about 7 years after the Battle of Nagashino. After the Takeda campaign ended, Oda Nobunaga rewarded Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu was granted the territory of Suruga, and he became the ruler of 3 entire provinces: Mikawa, Totomi, and Suruga. Having wandered as a hostage without his own land, Ieyasu had grown into a massive daimyo by the age of 41. The end of the Takeda still leaves a lingering ache. They had once been feared as the strongest, but Katsuyori could not keep up with the changing era. Against Nobunaga and Ieyasu, Katsuyori lacked enough matchlock guns and the capacity to use them at scale. His treasury was thin. He could not fund a long war, and he had no major port that could bring in firearms in bulk. His diplomacy also stumbled. In the end, he even turned the Hojo clan into an enemy. Ieyasu exploited that crack and allied with the Hojo. Katsuyori faced pressure from both sides, and as that squeeze tightened, many Takeda Kashindan began to defect to other lords. The Takeda clan began to collapse from within. I sometimes wonder how different Sengoku history would have been if the Takeda had broken the Nobunaga-Ieyasu alliance. While the Oda clan and the Tokugawa clan were in the middle of their campaign to crush the Takeda clan, a truly shocking event occurred where Tokugawa Ieyasu's eldest son Nobuyasu committed seppuku. Nobuyasu's name was made by taking the Nobu from Nobunaga and the Yasu from Ieyasu, so he was a highly symbolic figure directly connecting the 2 powerful clans. There are 2 main theories regarding the shocking seppuku incident of Nobuyasu. First, there was severe conflict between Ieyasu's eldest son Nobuyasu and his wife Tokuhime. Tokuhime was actually the daughter of Oda Nobunaga. Nobuyasu was a brave samurai, but he had a fiery temper, and Tokuhime had an equally explosive personality. To make matters worse, Tokuhime had a terrible relationship with her mother-in-law, Tsukiyama Dono, who came from the Imagawa clan. The Imagawa clan was the very family that had been utterly destroyed by Oda Nobunaga at Okehazama. With terrible in-law conflict piled on top, The marriage between Nobuyasu and Tokuhime was absolutely the worst. Eventually, a furious Tokuhime sent a letter to her father, Nobunaga. The letter contained shocking accusations that her husband and mother-in-law were secretly conspiring with their sworn enemy, the Takeda clan. Nobunaga did not hesitate for a second. Nobunaga ordered Ieyasu, saying, "Kill your wife and your son." Some of Ieyasu's Kashin, his trusted vassals, were enraged and argued that they should go to war with Nobunaga. But Ieyasu coldly and clearly faced reality. With tears in his eyes, Ieyasu finally made his agonizing decision. First, his wife Tsukiyama Dono was assassinated while she was traveling. A few days later, the order to commit seppuku was handed down to Nobuyasu, who had been confined in Futamata Castle. Nobuyasu was only 21 years old. This is the most commonly known version of the Nobuyasu seppuku incident. However, recently the historical community has raised a deeply fascinating and chilling alternative theory. There is a strong theory that this incident was not caused by external pressure at all, but was actually an internal power struggle within the Tokugawa clan, and an internal purge carried out by Ieyasu because he was terrified that his own son would overthrow him. At the time, Nobuyasu was a hot-blooded 20-year-old young man. On the battlefield, he was a fiercely brave heir to the daimyo, but politically, he clashed with his father Ieyasu at every single turn. Unlike his father, who took a hardline stance against their sworn enemy, the Takeda clan, Nobuyasu raised heavy suspicions multiple times by showing movements to join hands with the Takeda, heavily influenced by his mother Tsukiyama Dono. The bigger problem was that the Kashin holding up the Tokugawa clan was split right into two factions. The tension between the faction supporting Ieyasu and the faction supporting Nobuyasu reached its absolute peak. If left completely unchecked, it was a dire situation where the Tokugawa clan itself could be completely destroyed by internal conflict. From Ieyasu's perspective, it is highly likely that his son's very existence looked like a massive threat, ruining the clan's unity and planting the seeds of rebellion. During the Sengoku period, it was actually incredibly common for a son to kill his own father to become the daimyo. Recent historians analyze that Nobunaga did not order the killing first, but rather that Ieyasu first asked Nobunaga if it was okay to execute his son because he was suspicious, or that Ieyasu deliberately used Nobunaga's supreme authority to silence the opposing faction inside his own family. In other words, behind the tragic image of a father who was forced to kill his own son, there might have been the cold-blooded calculation of a ruthless ruler who needed to eliminate his most powerful rival just to protect his clan. Also, in the highly reliable historical record Todaiki, it is written in a way that suggests Nobunaga never actually told Ieyasu to make Nobuyasu commit seppuku, and that Ieyasu simply acted entirely on his own personal decision. In 1576, Oda Nobunaga began building a massive castle on Mount Azuchi. It was a strategic location close to Kyoto that could control the water transportation of Lake Biwa. The location Nobunaga chose was perfectly balanced. It was close enough to the capital so he could instantly grasp the political situation and intervene, but one step away to ensure safety from any potential wars breaking out in Kyoto. Built over about 3 years, Azuchi Castle was more than just a practical fortress for defense. It was a massive political and symbolic project that completely changed the paradigm of Japanese history and castle architecture. In fact, before this, Japanese castles were nothing more than practical fortresses built for war. But the castle Nobunaga envisioned was on a completely different level. Through this castle, Nobunaga wanted to declare to the whole world that he was the master of the realm. The most striking technical feature was its stone walls. He gathered the greatest group of stonemasons of the time, called the Anoshu, and had them wrap the entire mountain in a massive stone wall. It was an unprecedented mega-project for its time. But the true highlight of Azuchi Castle was its heart, the Tenshu. The Tenshu is the central tower, or the main keep of a Japanese castle. We can see this as the origin of what we commonly call the main keep today. Standing a massive 7 stories tall, this building was radical from the outside alone. The lower floors were painted in vibrant red and blue, and the top floor was completely covered in gold from front to back and left to right. The missionary Louis Frois actually visited Azuchi and saw it with his own eyes. He recorded a 7-story tower with painted interiors, multicolored walls, blue-tinted roof tiles, and a top floor dazzling in gold. Frois had seen the great palaces of Europe, but Azuchi Castle still overwhelmed him. Here, Nobunaga added one more brilliant idea. He brought in Kano Eitoku, the greatest painter of the era, to paint magnificent murals inside the castle. He filled the walls with a Buddhist worldview, Taoist immortals, and Confucian sages. This shows that Nobunaga wanted to be a godlike figure, embracing religion and philosophy, rather than just a powerful daimyo. To get people to come and see the castle, Nobunaga even lit up the entire castle with lanterns on holidays and special occasions to create a beautiful night view. He essentially came up with the idea for a modern light-up event 450 years ago. Also, he made his key Kashin live near Azuchi Castle to concentrate his military power and strengthen his control over them. Ultimately, Azuchi Castle was the ultimate crystallization, combining 3 purposes: a military base, an economic hub, and a symbol of the new absolute power named Oda Nobunaga. In 1577, while Oda Nobunaga was expanding his power with terrifying momentum, Uesugi Kenshin finally began marching west with an army of 30,000 men. Uesugi Kenshin, the powerhouse of the north, respected the authority of the shogun, and he highly valued loyalty. Kenshin judged that Nobunaga's unstoppable moves were disrupting the order of the world, especially when Nobunaga mercilessly oppressed Buddhist forces by burning down Mount Hiei. Kenshin, a devout Buddhist, finally made Nobunaga his new target. Kenshin's army was like an unstoppable force. He captured Nanao Castle in the Noto region, which was loyal to Nobunaga, and fiercely pressured the Oda clan. Hearing the news of Uesugi Kenshin marching west, Oda Nobunaga could not help but panic. Nobunaga sent his core Kashin, Shibata Katsui, and Hashiba Hideyoshi with a massive army of 40,000 men to stop Kenshin. Arriving at the battlefield, Shibata Katsui and Hashiba Hideyoshi had completely different opinions while facing the Tedorigawa River. The commander Katsui, acting like a traditional warrior, argued that they should cross the river and attack head-on. On the other hand, Hideyoshi knew the terror of Kenshin. Rain was falling, the river was swelling, and they had no idea where Kenshin's ambush troops might be hidden. Hideyoshi judged that crossing the river was a suicidal act. Shibata Katsui insulted Hashiba Hideyoshi by calling him a coward, and with his pride hurt, Hideyoshi did something completely unexpected that would go down in the history of the Sengoku period. He took his own troops and deserted the battlefield without permission and without any consultation. It was a clear act of insubordination without the permission of his lord, Nobunaga. Nobunaga was furious at Hideyoshi's actions, but eventually, Hideyoshi succeeded in calming Nobunaga's anger by making massive contributions in subsequent battles. Perhaps Hideyoshi knew that he was too competent for his lord Nobunaga to kill him. While the Oda army was shaking from internal division, Kenshin drove them right into a trap. As Katsui led his soldiers and started crossing the Tedorigawa River, Kenshin quietly watched this entire scene from across the river. Kenshin did not rush. He waited until the enemy had completely crossed the river and had their backs turned to their escape route. Due to the autumn rain, the waters of the Tedorigawa River had swelled dangerously. Fighting with your back to a river is a very dangerous choice, but Katsui was absolutely sure that Kenshin was nowhere near, and he crossed the river and set up camp. At that exact moment, the flags of Kenshin's army appeared on the hill. The elite troops, led personally by the Dragon of Echigo, began their charge. Kenshin's attack was like lightning. He struck their weakest point before the enemy could even organize their battle lines. The panicked generals of the Oda army ordered a retreat, but the flooded river stood right behind them. If they went forward, Kenshin's blades were waiting, and if they went backward, the raging floodwaters were waiting for them. Terrified by the rapid advance of Kenshin's army, the Oda soldiers pushed each other and jumped right into the river. thousands of soldiers, unable to overcome the heavy weight of their armor, drowned in the water, and the river turned red with the blood of the Oda soldiers. Nobunaga's battle-hardened troops were routed without even putting up a proper fight, all because they were terrified by the mere name of Uesugi Kenshin. True to his title as the god of war, Kenshin's tactics were absolutely perfect, and Shibata Katsui barely escaped with his life. According to the historical record Shinchoku-ki, it is described that the river was so full of the corpses of the Oda army that the water could not even flow. People at the time praised Kenshin's overwhelming power, saying the Oda army was swept away and killed by the river before Kenshin even arrived, and we call the battle of this day the Battle of Tedorigawa. In my view, the clever Hideyoshi foresaw that if they fought just as Shibata Katsui wanted, he and his army would be completely annihilated, which is why he deserted the camp in advance. The Tedorigawa River, where the battle took place, is in modern-day Ishikawa Prefecture, which was the Hokuriku region known for having the heaviest snowfall in Japan. When the battle ended in November, they were already at the doorstep of winter. If supply lines were blocked by snow, it could become very dangerous. So, as winter approached, Uesugi Kenshin temporarily returned to his home base, Kasugiyama Castle. Returning to his territory, Kenshin gave his Kashin an unprecedented order. It was a massive campaign plan to mobilize his entire army in the spring of 1578 and march right into Kyoto to completely uproot Nobunaga's forces. Kenshin's plan was meticulous. He wanted to restore the authority of the fallen shogun Ashikaga Yoshiaki and fix the order in Kyoto, where the Tenno resided. The Tenno is the Emperor of Japan, serving as the nation's supreme symbolic and religious figurehead. While the shogun held military power, the Tenno was seen as the source of all legal authority and divine legitimacy. To do this, Kenshin formed a massive anti-Nobunaga coalition with the Mori clan and Ishiyama Hongan-ji. Finally, the fateful month of March 1578 arrived. Ahead of the campaign, Kenshin checked his armor and weapons and hardened his resolve. But on March 9th, just 3 days before the march, an unexpected event occurred. Kenshin suddenly collapsed from a cerebral hemorrhage while he was taking a dump. Kenshin always loved to drink alcohol, and he had a dietary habit of eating very salty foods like pickled plums and miso, so it is highly presumed that he suffered from high blood pressure. Also, Kenshin's home base Echigo is a freezing cold region. The exact moment he strained in a freezing toilet, his blood vessels in his brain might not have been able to withstand the sudden spike in blood pressure. Kenshin lost consciousness right after collapsing, and even though his Kashin rushed to his side, he never opened his eyes again. 4 days later, on March 13th, at the age of 49, Kenshin ended his turbulent life in the Sengoku period without leaving a single final word. Hearing the news of Kenshin's death, Nobunaga was deeply relieved and said, "Now the realm has finally fallen into my hands." The missionary Louis Frois, who watched Nobunaga up close, wrote that Nobunaga looked down on every other daimyo in Japan and talked to them as if they were beneath him. And with Kenshin gone, Frois noted, no one in Japan could stand against Nobunaga anymore. Kenshin passed away without naming an heir, and the powerful Uesugi clan he led fell into a succession dispute and rapidly weakened. The westward march of the Dragon of Echigo came to a hollow and sudden end. Even in the brutal chaos of the Sengoku period, Uesugi Kenshin was a truly unique figure who valued righteousness above the expansion of territory or his own personal desires. He was more than just a daimyo ruling a region. He truly believed himself to be the living avatar of Bishamonten, the god of war, and he was a true god of war who never lost a single time in over 70 battles throughout his life. We can catch a glimpse of his noble spirit in the famous anecdote where he sent salt to his fated rival, Takeda Shingen, right in the middle of a war. Wanting a fair and honorable showdown rather than a cowardly victory, Kenshin was such a noble human being that even his enemies had no choice but to respect him. Trying to protect the falling authority of the shogun to the very end and swinging his sword to restore the order of the Tenno, Kenshin was a guardian who personally showed the world what true loyalty meant during the Sengoku period, where betrayal ran completely wild. With Oda Nobunaga's greatest enemy, the Takeda clan, falling and the Uesugi clan spiraling into chaos, the only forces left to keep Oda Nobunaga in check were the Mori clan in the west and the Hojo clan in the east. Oda Nobunaga continued to expand his territory based on his overwhelming economic and military power. The vast majority of weaker daimyos around him voluntarily pledged their loyalty to Nobunaga without even fighting a single battle. And finally, in 1580, he even made peace with Hongan-ji Kenyo. It took a total of 10 grueling years from the time the war first started to finally reaching this peace agreement. When Nobunaga completely blockaded the sea route, which was the only supply line for Ishiyama Hongan-ji, their ally, the Mori clan in the west, could no longer deliver food and weapons. The people inside Ishiyama Hongan-ji reached their absolute limit, and Hongan-ji Kenyo sensed that any further resistance would only lead to complete annihilation. Nobunaga also judged that fighting to the bitter end to capture the castle was not the right answer. He knew that if he forcefully occupied the castle and ended up killing Hongan-ji Kenyo, millions of fanatical believers spread all across Japan would definitely stage unstoppable and violent riots. So Nobunaga pulled the strings to have the Tenno issue an imperial order to Hongan-ji Kenyo. Given the powerful justification of the Tenno's mediation, Kenyo was able to leave the castle, honorably under the pretext of following the Tenno's will for peace, rather than accepting a humiliating defeat. The lives of the believers and soldiers who defended Ishiyama Hongan-ji were strictly guaranteed, and Hongan-ji Kenyo emptied Ishiyama and moved his residence to the Ki region. All the authority that the Ikko-Ikki held in that area was completely handed over to Nobunaga, and afterwards, Osaka Castle was built on the very site of Ishiyama Hongan-ji, one of Japan's most iconic landmarks. If you enjoyed this episode of our Sengoku series, make sure to drop a like and subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments. It gives me huge energy to keep making these videos. I'll see you again in next episode of our Japan Sengoku series. Thank you.